Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, I want to share some thoughts with you on self-imposed detours. Self-imposed detours. I was in Dallas about a few weeks ago, and I heard a guy named Sean talk about self-imposed detours. So I thought that would be a great theme to talk about with you. Steve Harvey, the guy that you've seen on TV for decades, he said, excuses are self-imposed roadblocks, detours, and traffic jams that take you off your road to success. I wonder how many of you, I know it's happened to me more than a few times, we get distracted by life. We get distracted by difficulties. We get distracted by struggles that happen to us from time to time. In the Bible, over in Galatians chapter 6, it talks about if you find somebody that's messed up, my paraphrase of this text, that they've messed up, that we're supposed to restore them, or as the original text says, to set them like you would set a broken bone. And I wonder how many times you and I have difficulty in restoring people that have messed up. When you've messed up too, I've messed up more times than I care to tell you. In fact, over in the book of James in the New Testament, it says, don't merely listen to the word. It says, because if you just listen to the word, it just deceives yourself. It says to do what it says. You know how easy it is to forget what you think you know? In fact, I've seen people online and in person. They're so critical of the stupid things other people have done when they've done way more stupid things in their lives. I wonder if that's happened to you. You're critical of this person and that person about being stupid and making wrong choices, when if you stop and think about it, not that long ago, you were making some wrong choices yourself. There's that same text in James that says, if anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet doesn't bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, that man's religion is worthless. Have you ever met religious people, and I use that term in quotes, who were supposed to be all that, but when you really drill down to really what's beneath all that, it's all a show. In fact, in the New Testament, Jesus really talked about that a bit, how he was more against the religious people of the time than the non-religious people, because the religious people tended to have this image, to have a fakeness about them that would drive Jesus crazy. I read an article recently. It says it's called The Self-Deceit of James Hammond. This story is kind of rough to share, but I think you're going to get the point shortly. It says the capacity for self-deceit about our sin is illustrated graphically in the life of James Hammond, a plantation owner, a slaver, a congressman, believe it or not, and a governor during the years when the United States government practiced slavery. He was also a man who abused his power to satisfy his raging sexual desires. Yeah, it's a little abrasive here today on the show. In 1839, he purchased an 18-year-old slave named Sally and her child, Louisa. He made Sally his concubine and had many children by her. Then, when Sally's daughter, Louisa, turned 12, he made her his concubine and fathered children by her. Not content at all with the sexual abuse of his slaves, he also sexually abused his daughters and other people in the household. His evil caught up with him when his brother-in-law threatened to publicly reveal his sexual assaults on his daughters if Hammond didn't resign from political office. Now, this is where it kind of gets really warped. Hammond's wife left him, and many of his livestock died as a result of disease. Astonishingly, Hammond was so self-deceived that he couldn't see the error of his ways. After many of his slaves and livestock had died from diseases, this is what he wrote in his diary. It's incredible. He says, it crushes me to the earth to see everything of mine so blasted around me. Everything that seems to be done to me has been attacked by others. Never was so a man more distraught, at least in his own mind, or cursed. Listen to this. He says, what have I done or omitted to do or to deserve this fate? No one, not one, exercises the slightest indulgence to me. Nothing is overlooked, nothing forgiven. Now think about this guy. He was so out there that he didn't even see the error of his ways. I wonder how many times you and I have met people that just don't see the error of their ways. I think this guy was a sociopath, personally. He was self-deceived. Let's just pause a minute. Think about that. How many people do you know in your life that are so self-deceived they can't see the error of their ways? I think all of us have been there at some point or another. We've been so distracted by what we want and how bad we want it that we can't see the error of our ways. Much, not all things in life, can be traced back to the decisions we make and the people we choose to hang around daily. There's a story in the Bible over in 2 Kings, and when it talks about King David. There's a long story behind how King David became king, but one day in 2 Kings, it says, "Then it happened in the spring at the time when the kings go out to battle." Now let me just pause there a second. The kings at that time led their armies from the front. They didn't, stay in the office. They didn't stay at the castle and direct orders. They led their people from the front. So David should have been with his guys in war. So again, then it happened in the spring at the time that when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed these groups of people that were their enemies. Now when evening came, David rose from his bed and walked around the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. Verse 3, so David sent and inquired about this woman. And one said, "Is that not Bathsheba, the woman's name, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah?" Now remember, David should have been with his men in battle. He should not have been back at the office. So verse 4, David sent messengers and took her, and when she came in, it's a rough show here today, very brutal, very blunt. He lay with her and she became pregnant. Longer story short, David tried to hide his tracks. He eventually had Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba, killed. And then David took Bathsheba as his wife. Now, I wonder how many times you have tried to hide your tracks. You've tried to maybe take extenuating circumstances and maybe make excuses for things that maybe should not have happened in your own life. Now, I wonder if you and I would have been able to realize, after looking at the mistakes we've made in the past, that maybe you need people around us to keep us accountable. In fact, in this story, there was a guy named Nathan who confronted David and said, "David, you messed up." So you need people in your life to hold you accountable to the stupid things you've done. So in this story, David was approached by a guy named Nathan. And Nathan decided to confront David in a very unique way. He asked him some questions after he told him a story, and David gave him an answer, but it was really, the story was directed to David. And after Nathan described what he was doing, David understood that he was the one who messed up. Isaac Butterworth wrote, "Do you remember the story of the emperor's clothes? If I am recalling it right," he says, "someone persuaded the emperor to buy a suit of clothes that only people with the most exquisite taste in fashion could see. Of course, the emperor could not see the clothes, nor could anyone else, because the peddler was lying. There were no clothes to be seen, but no one would say so, not even the emperor. So why not? Because no one wanted to admit that they couldn't see the clothes the emperor had spent a fortune buying. Of course, the emperor wanted to show off his new clothes, so a parade was arranged, and there, on the street with thousands of onlookers, the emperor rode along completely exposed, but knowing that they may themselves would be exposed by having less than refined taste, the people wouldn't speak up and tell the truth. The emperor was out in public in the buff, and nobody would even say anything until one little boy in the crowd spoke up. Of course, it's a child's tale, the story says, but it exposes, if I may, these very grown-up truths. These vanity leads to self-deception. And the fear of those with power causes us to collude with their ego by flattering them. In other words, we all have a tendency to live a lie. Now, the most difficult things you and I can do is look in the mirror with the good and the bad and the ugly. And I think all of us have some measure of good and bad and ugly in us. Lloyd Steffen wrote, "We notice instances of self-deception when the gap between behavior and interpretation is clear. We detect instances of self-deception when people interpret to us the meaning of their behavior in ways that seem far-fetched or skewed." Listen, self-deception lurks in denials, double-mindedness, rationalizations, cover-ups, and cover stories. Elaborate and almost convincing justifications and excuses and even attributions to blame and evasions of responsibility. Here goes on. We observe it in the person who exhibits an eating disorder and denies that there is a problem, even if it's a person who exhibits dependence on alcohol and says that maybe alcohol, reduces stress, or a minister who continually blames his congregation, not his preaching. When members doze in the pews and the person who refuses to acknowledge and potentially life-threatening illnesses. It goes on to give other examples about people who blame everything and everybody else except the person in the mirror. And I think you and I have a tendency to, maybe not all the time, maybe not all of us, but some of us have a tendency to blame other people for our own struggles. Samuel Johnson once noted the kinds of moves that self-deceivers make. They congratulate themselves on a single act of generosity, telling themselves that they are generous people, or they dwell on the faults of others, or they avoid people who know that what they're like, preferring the company of those who will not expose themselves to others. You see, self-deceivers, Johnson said, avoid self-communion. If the loss of honesty undermines communal life, the loss of dishonesty undermines the inner life. What I'm trying to get down to here today in this very strange way is to understand that there are people around us who frankly don't know that they don't know. And sometimes there's other people who know that they don't know, but they have a facade that they're trying to get across to people to make them think that they know everything about everything, when in fact very few people know everything about everything. The most powerful people I've met and read about and seen on TV have weaknesses. I could tell you, one after another of some people I know that are well known, that they have struggles too. They have difficulties, they have stresses, they have challenges that they have to try to overcome by the hour. But they keep going, they keep moving forward. I wonder if you and I have a tendency maybe to blame the past, to blame situations in our lives, and frankly make excuses for us to not do the things that we need to do. And I think those excuses over time and over the years, they get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point whereby it's going to be very difficult to overcome them because they've created such a roadblock in your own life. So let me go back to what Nathan talked to David about. The story is told in 2 Samuel chapter 12, and a paraphrase of this says this. So Nathan said to David, "There were two men in a city, one rich and one was poor. And the rich man had huge flocks of sheep, herds of cattle, and the poor man had nothing but one little female lamb, which he had bought and raised. It grew up with him and his children and as a member of his family. It ate off his plate and drank from his cup and slept on his bed. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler dropped in on the rich man. He was too stingy to take an animal from his own herds or flocks and to make a meal for his guest, so he took the poor man's lamb and prepared a meal to set before his guests. So David exploded in anger. As surely as God lives, he said to Nathan, the man who did this ought to be lynched. He must repay for the lamb 4 times over for his crime and stinginess. In verse 7, it says, "You're the man," said Nathan. "And here's what. The God of Israel has said to you, I make you king over Israel. I freed you from the fist of Saul. I gave you your master's daughter and other wives to have and to hold. I gave you both Israel and Judah. And if it had been not enough, I'd have given you much, much more." So he says, "So why have you treated the word of God with brazen contempt, doing this great evil? You murdered Uriah, then took his wife as your wife. Worse, you killed him. And now, because you treated God with such contempt and took Uriah's wife as your wife, killing and murder will continually plague your family. Now think about this a minute. David knew that it was wrong. David should have been, like I said earlier, he should have been at war with his men, but he chose to stay behind. You know, when you and I are at the wrong place sometimes, it's our fault. When we should be at the right place, we should be doing our job, is what I'm trying to say here. Is if we were doing our job, if you were doing your job, if I was doing my job, many times the temptation that we struggle with wouldn't be a temptation because we wouldn't be anywhere around it. Do you understand? That's kind of like what I'm trying to say. So do you have Nathans in your life that will hold you, accountable to your stupid things that you've done over the years? Do you have people that will challenge you? And lately, I've had a handful of people, less than 5 people, that I ask every few weeks, have I done something stupid? Have I made some mistakes? Have I, posted something out there that I shouldn't have posted? Have I crossed a line somewhere? Help me become accountable. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nathan had the courage to step up to King David and said, you messed up. You and I need people around our lives that will tell us when maybe we don't even want to hear it, that you've messed up. Bradley Foster wrote, absolutely no one is beyond self-deception. We deceive ourselves all the time. We distort facts to rationalize our own self-deception, usually unconsciously, he says. We hide things about ourselves that are unacceptable to ourselves. Cognitive dissonance is when our actions don't match our values or beliefs. He says the disconnect makes us feel uncomfortable, so we rationalize or adjust a belief to return to the feeling of comfort. If you stop and think about that little illustration, that definition, that kind of resembles the people in your life and my life that are sociopaths. You think, John, some of these things you're talking about today are pretty heavy. Well, life is pretty heavy. There are people around you that will not admit that what they're doing is wrong because of what they've done. I know somebody who, in fact, I've known several people that will blame everything in their past except the person in the mirror. In fact, they'll lie about the people in the past. They'll say, this person did this person did that, that's why I'm the way I am. So when you go back and interview these people, they didn't do any of that stuff, not even once. But they use these people as crutches to mentally play games with people around you and around me. A guy named Soren wrote, there are 2 ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. It takes, I think, a really special person to step up and say, I need you to tell me what I don't want to hear. Think about that a minute. Do you have people around you right now that will tell you what you don't want to hear? Because I think there's times when you grow up and, as a kid, sometimes you don't have that choice, because your parent or parents are going to sometimes tell you what you don't want to hear. But then as you grow up and get older, unless you place people in your lives that hold you accountable, there's not going to be a whole lot of people around you that are going to step up. In fact, I've known from personal experience that most people know when you're messing up, but it's in their mind none of their business, so why should they speak up? So I'm asking you maybe to give other people with wisdom, people that are smart, people that are educated in some form, permission to speak into your life in ways that will give you information and maybe guidance to keep you in the road. You're right in the middle of the road, because oftentimes life has us going out in detours. Sometimes life has us getting distracted by this exit or this difficulty. You need to put people in your life that'll hold you accountable. I think it's a good idea to build into your life Nathans. I believe 99% of the people around you, even if they were seeing you going off the deep end, wouldn't speak up. Because again, who am I? Who are they? So you're the one who has to put the tools in their hands. You're the one who has to give them the okay to say, you know what, if you see me going off the road, I need you to grab me. I need you to pull me back. Over in the New Testament of the Bible, in a book called Ephesians, Paul was a big writer of the New Testament. Paul was a guy that for a number of years fought against the early church. He was an enemy of this new sect called Christianity, until some things happened that he was now a big fan of it. In fact, he wrote a good chunk of the New Testament. It was very interesting how he went from hating it to being an evangelist for it. So in Ephesians chapter 4, he talks about this. He says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members of one body, he says. He says, be angry, and yet do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your anger. And do not give the devil an opportunity. He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need. Verse 29, let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only such a word is good for edification or building up, according to the need of those at the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. It says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. But here, this is where it gets a little personal. Verse 31. He says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. And this verse 32 always grabs me by the tonsils. It says, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ has forgiven you. You know how hard it is to forgive? Notice I didn't say forget, because I'm not there, but oftentimes we're challenged to forgive those, as another story says in the Bible, who have trespassed against us, who have insulted us in some form, or who have taken things from us. I have to be very candid with you. I'm not there yet, but the scripture, Paul says that we're supposed to forgive each other. You know how hard that is to forgive people who've hurt you purposely? Now, there's people who've hurt you accidentally or not intentionally. That's a different conversation. But here we're talking about people who have purposely done damage to you. Dr. Patricia Thompson talks about how it's important to recruit people, as I mentioned a couple times now, who will keep you accountable. She says that when it can feel great to have friends who will let you stay inside your comfort zone, in with that accountability partner should be someone who will also push you. After all, if we're going to grow, you have to experiment with new behaviors. Do you know how many people who've lived a lifetime who've never lived? What are you saying, John? Yeah, there's people who have died at 80 and 90 years old who haven't gotten out of that comfort zone, who haven't stepped beyond what they think they're capable of because of fear. That's another show for another day. This person says about compassion, personal growth can be challenging, and knowing that someone can relate to what you're going through, but yet they know how you feel, but they're not going to compromise for you. They're not going to keep you in your little zone. You know, I've had people around me that have continually pushed me. There's a guy named Paul, a good friend of mine, who pushed me, in essence, just with a conversation, not getting nasty or mean. He pushed me to do some things that I'm doing now to help other people. But I was terrified to do it. So, again, another story behind that. These people, these Nathans around you, these people that hold you accountable, they can be compassionate, but not too compassionate, because sometimes you have people around you, oh yeah, I know you struggle with this and I know you struggle with that. You don't necessarily want those kind of people around you. You want those kind of people around you that will get you, that will push you out of that box, because they see you, they see the potential in you. They'll give you corrective feedback. Again, you need to be very specific about these kind of people. You don't want people who don't know that they don't know. You don't want those people in your team. You want to find people who know. You want to read books about people who understand. Surround yourself with people who get it, who have had people in their lives that have pushed them out of their comfort zone. I think you're going to find that when you do that, then you're going to realize adventures in your life that you have not seen before, because there are people that love you enough to not let you stay the same. Let me say it again. You need to surround yourself with people who love you enough that won't allow you to stay the same. Oftentimes, you and I avoid these big steps forward because of fear. An author some 200 years ago wrote, "Never confuse a single defeat with a final defeat." You know, you've tried this and you've tried that over and over again. You fell on your face. So what? Get back up again. Keep moving forward. Don't let the mistakes of your errors in the past keep you from doing great things in your own life. So as I close here today, it's really important for you and I to understand that you and I have to understand that we've all made mistakes. We've all screwed up. We have to take responsibility for our own actions, because when we take responsibility for our own actions, then there gives a certain sense of credibility to what you're trying to do in your own life. So in Proverbs it says this, as I close, "Iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens his friend's countenance." So I challenge you today to surround yourself with people that will hold you accountable, that will push you out of your box. My name is John Carver, and I thank you for watching.